Books? Get them out of here! I don't want to see them. You can go on for hours about how this book is culturally relevant, or this book is historically accurate, but at the end of the day, dude, movies are still cooler! In high school, they forced you to read something practically every term. Reading was nothing more than a curricular requirement I needed in order to graduate. Beyond that, why the hell would I read a book when absolutely nothing you've shown me has motivated me to find joy through it? And that's how I was for a while. A broken boy filled with teenage angst towards the likes of Catcher in the Rye and Clifford the Big Red Dog. But then I found something that turned my entire world upside down. Something that very well may stick with me until the day I die. Something that actually interested me. Oh my goodness, what could it be? What sort of mad creation does it take to encourage someone like that to challenge their convictions and read an entire 700-page book? Short answer, House of Leaves. Long answer? Alright, here we go. Now, if you've read this book, then you know that it's probably the furthest thing from a starter pack in getting people to start reading. I mean, this thing is complex. Complexly. You've got like multiple narratives stacked up on top of each other, each carrying their own contradictions and insane trivialities. Essentially, you've got an old dead guy that wrote a dissertation about a spooky documentary, but also a fun fact, he's blind, and the film also doesn't even exist. How do you even begin to process that information? You've also got really odd typography. There are pages of this book that look like this, and pages that look like this. And what, am I supposed to read all of this? Pardon my language, but I would rather not, please and thank you. But you have to believe me when I say that all of this madness is incredibly crucial to the reading experience that is House of Leaves. All of it works together to make sure that you have a really disorienting experience reading it. But I promise you, it'll be like nothing you've ever read before. You see, this book isn't all just fancy visuals, alright? It's got so many licks to its center that it puts Tootsie Pops to shame. I mean, the last 200 pages of this book are dedicated to appendixes. Appendices? It's essentially a collection of scraps to help piece together some of what you just read, whilst also throwing into the mix loads of poetry and an entire frickin' novella. The whale still letters, by the way, I would not advise reading unless you want to be very, very sad. But that's the fat. Where's the meat of this? To its core, I believe House of Leaves to be an immensely intriguing horror story. The bulk of the book describes a fake documentary about a family in Virginia experiencing some paranormal activity. You've got a house that is literally bigger on the inside than it is on the outside, literally by just 1/4 of an inch. You'd probably think, oh well, who cares? That's probably a zoning issue, you know, you're gonna have to work that out with the state. But I find it to be obsessively captivating. The characters do too. I mean, they bring in loads of scientifically accurate measuring instruments, but they all read the same result. It's a case where something that is fundamentally impossible by all measures of reality is happening, and you don't know exactly how to deal with that. It's something that can so easily worm its way into your mind, because that just doesn't happen. Don't even get me started on the door that just appears in their living room one day that opens up into a featureless black void of a hallway leading God knows where. Okay, I'll take a look. That's one of the coolest things about this book, if you ask me, being how realistic these anomalies are treated. Every phenomenon that the Navidson family experiences goes through excruciating testing. We're talking lab results on the materials in the void, measuring montages, tactical approaches to venturing inside the hallway. Even Zampano chimes in, going off about the science of how echoes work for like an entire chapter. It can feel like you're reading a textbook at times, but like, you know, a cool textbook. None of this crossroads gobbledygook. It's also impossible to ignore just how brilliantly written House of Leaves is. I've always thought books have an extremely difficult task in trying to make the reader feel scared. They don't have music cues or spooky visuals beyond the text that invites you to read between their lines. In most cases, they just have the written word to work with. But at least in the case of House of Leaves, the skill of a wordsmith can end up fashioning a unique horror ambiance inside your own head that can feel specific to you and can't be directly shared with other people through a Netflix password. For example, there are incredibly tense moments of this book that are enhanced by the text becoming more sparse as the tension builds. You flip the page again and again and again and again, each one doling out a simple word until the text itself flips upside down and starts hugging the walls of the paper, forcing the reader to turn the book like a cryptic steering wheel, just just to keep up with the heat of the moment. These parts become about so much more than just reading a book. It almost employs you as a part of the story, desperate to uncover what lies beyond each page as you bend to its will and adjust your reading experience to keep up with your curiosity that's always one step ahead of you. I think it's simply brilliant. But you also gotta consider just how friggin' difficult this book is to read. There are pages filled with nothing but word vomit that feels like an 8th grade 5-minute free write smoothie that was made with psilocybin and mercury. And it's just nonsense. I honestly could not recall to you a single word used throughout this section. But don't you get it? It means something. At the end of the day, it's not all pointless drivel, you know, even if it's meant to be. To be fair though, Johnny, the generator of this interesting poetry, isn't doing too well. He's seeing things that aren't really there, and he's holed up in his apartment just trying to recompile this essay. He's a little bit of a goof. He's a bit wacky. This book's bread and butter for engaging you is introducing these ever alluring details that build off of each other. There are great signature horror moments as well, don't get me wrong. But what I adore most about House of Leaves is how it feels like you're finding your way through a labyrinth. You've got many twists and frequent turns and delusions of how far you've gone versus how far you have left. I mean, is there even an end to this thing? Who can I trust when the person who's built this maze is blindfolding me, spinning me around 10 times, and setting me loose again? But it never feels too aimless. You want to stick with it because there are engaging stories with actually complex characters that you want to learn more about. It is truly a massive list to go through to talk about every single little thing that this book does so well to aid in the entire experience. It is the most confusing, straightforward anomaly of a book you might ever read. And it has completely changed my perspective on reading. Remember this guy? That was me! I hated books so much, I gagged every time we drove past an Indigo. But House of Leaves was powerful enough to break me of that conviction. It was challenging, it was gripping, it was freaky, it was intriguing, but most importantly, it was something that I wanted to read. Every day after work, I'd come home and I'd read a couple chapters. Sloppily retelling the story to coworkers the next day was just and simply put, it was one of the best experiences I've ever had with any piece of media ever. The unfortunate truth is that every single book I read in the most malleable years of my life were not only mandatory, but also none of which fit with any of my interests. And thusly, it led me down a path to disregard books entirely as something, you know, for nerds to read. What are you, 4 eyes? You like reading words on a page? Boring. I want a sport. I want sport ball. It took House of Leaves to make me realize that if I can find the time and perhaps the right book, then that can be just as fulfilling as any other experience. And every book I've chosen to read after House of Leaves has continued to shape my interest and give me fun experiences to talk about. The Raw Shark Text is another fascinatingly odd book that takes some formatting inspiration from House of Leaves, and I absolutely loved reading this one as well. Someone Who Will Love You in All Your Damaged Glory. This is the BoJack Horseman creator Raphael Bob-Waksberg's book, and it is an incredible selection of short stories that are both incredibly lovely and also sad. Italo Calvino's If on a Winter's Night a Traveler is a strange fever dream disguised as intensely profound. And also, there's just a ton of sex in this book. The latter half of this book is just filled with it. The author even points it out towards the end and goes, "Ah, you sicko, you probably like reading this stuff." And I'm like, actually, no, I just want to continue with the plot of the story. I also have a ton of other books on my to-do list that I'm really excited to dig into, even if it takes me like 5 years to get to them because I love procrastinating, and also YouTube is like the only thing I think about. I feel like I was fed the wrong books at the wrong time, and now that I am able to fine-tune my interests and trust what books I actually want to read, it's as though I now have access to an entire new world of stories that I never would have otherwise found out about. And I think that's just a beautiful thing. But that's the fat. Where's the meat of this, boy? Give me the meat.